All right. Well, it is 10:30 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you for joining us this morning for our BPR webcast, Streamlining Business Processes for the New Year. Brief look at today's agenda. I'll do some brief introductions, then we will spend the bulk of the time talking about streamlining business processes with our guest, John Berglind, and we'll finish things off with some designated Q&A time. On that note, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and either submit those through the Q&A portal or the chat portal. If we can address them in real time, we definitely will. Otherwise, we'll hold on to those until the end. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit more about Liberty Technology Advisors. LTA is a 100% independent business management consulting company founded in 1995. We have a team of expert business process and ERP consultants, each averaging 20 years or more of experience. LTA offers a variety of services, mainly focusing on ERP and BPR services, as you can see on the screen. Also, we do have some value-added services such as IT security advisory, interim CIO, project rescue, etc. A look at today's guest. We're going to be joined today by LTA Vice President John Berglind. As you can see on the screen on John's bio, he has a deep experience, especially in business process and process reengineering. John heads up our BPR team here at LTA and eats, sleeps, and breathes process reengineering. Prior to John's time at LTA, he was a senior manager at Ernst & Young, CFO and vice president. And for the past 13 years, John's been here with LTA. So on that note, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to John. So John, welcome.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. And thanks everybody for your time this morning. We know it's valuable and we want to make sure we take advantage of it and make sure we're getting you what you need or what you came here to get. And on that note, I just want to reiterate what Brad said, making sure that you submit the questions, and if we can answer them in real time, we will. Otherwise, we will catch them up at the end. So business processes, I don't know how many people are familiar with Edwards Deming. He's known basically as the father of modern manufacturing. And a couple of quotes from him that I use frequently as we go through this, or that we use frequently as we go through this. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. That is in itself a difficult thing for people to come to grips with. And it can't be 50 first dates. You can't look at the same problem over and over again, and the same issue comes up over and over again, and handle it differently each time. There has to be a process that you go through to handle that. And it's the same thing in business. If you can't describe what you're doing as a business, as a process, then it's difficult to get your point across in terms of what you are doing. So what is a business process and what are some of the fundamentals? In a nutshell, it's basically a system, activities that create value for your customers. In other words, it's activities that your customers are willing to pay for. We've got some clients out there, and when we first started with them, they would have 4 or 5 quality checks along the line. And that could be fine, but the bottom line is your customer's not willing to pay for those 4 or 5 quality checks. They really want it done right the first time. So if you're doing a process within your organization that your customer's not willing to pay you for, stop. Let's reevaluate that. Let's take a look at it. The other part is processes are always cross-departmental. Departments are important, don't get me wrong, they're functional towers of expertise. But the typical process does cut across multiple departments. Order to cash, for instance, cuts across everywhere from customer service to inside sales, potentially outside sales, all the way through the manufacturing process, through the shipping process, through the delivery process, and through the customer care that's issued after that. All the way down to receiving payment, invoicing and receiving payment from that customer. So you can see it hits a lot of different departments as it goes through that. And it's important to understand what those departments do and how they interrelate with the other departments. I've got a picture in my office of a gentleman who's standing at the top of a mountain. He has a snowball in his hand, and he starts to roll that snowball down the hill. And then there's a guy from finance at the bottom of the hill with his arms open wide saying, I got it, I got it, I got it. Those are the types of things that we try to solve and do those as upstream as possible. And obviously, in order to do this, the processes need to be documented and fully understood by people participating in it. And that, again, is cross-functionally. So your accounts receivable department should know what the order entry or customer service department is doing, because they so interact with each other and so interlock with each other that it's important. And that leads us to that final point of what is a business process fundamental. And that's that the processes should be mapped. So you can see what happens on an end-to-end basis. Order to cash, for instance, procure to pay, all of those play hand in hand with each other. So how do you go about doing business process reengineering? What we found to be the most effective methodology of doing this is you have a series of facilitated meetings with the cross-functional team, and then you bring in specific subject matter experts for specific functions. The core team in these tends to be people from all the areas. So even though we may only be talking about manufacturing, for instance, or distribution, or accounts receivable, there should be representatives from each of the processes, each of the functional areas that exist. So in an accounts receivable re-engineering session, for instance, there would be a representative from manufacturing, there would be a representative from customer service, there'd be a representative from sales, because it's important that they understand how that entire process works. And then if there's a specific function where whoever is representing that particular topic for the day, if that be accounts receivable, for instance, they may bring in specific people from accounts receivable, such as an AR manager or somebody along those lines, to get into any level of detail that you need to get into as you're going through there. In order to do this, you have to understand what your current state business processes are. I would say probably a majority of our clients don't have their current state business processes documented, and what they do have is either tribal knowledge or very isolated in a silo documentation, and it's not really across the board. So the first thing you really want to do is break down what are we doing from a current state standpoint cross-functionally. How does this work? And from there, we can identify the pain points that exist in the current state processes. And it gives you a map to build off of. From that map and from those pain point processes, you define your future state business processes. And a lot of times those future state business processes will go along the lines of what we call a foursquare. And those are things that you want to eliminate, things that you want to avoid, things that you want to preserve, and things that you want to achieve. And so there will be certain goals and objectives that you want to achieve by redesigning this business process. Along with that, there's going to be certain things you want to avoid, things that you know are happening today, which are causing issues, causing pain points, causing hiccups, causing customer dissatisfaction as you go through this. So we want to identify those as part of the transition from current state to future state. Then we take this and start to map out, what does the future state process look like? Why are we doing some of the processes in the current state that we're doing? Is it because we've always done it that way? Is it because it's something that we had to do once because this process or this business issue occurred, and so we implemented a process that may no longer be needed? Processes grow evolutionary. So what a business process solved at one point never really goes away. That process still happens. In most cases, what we see is there's another process that's put in place to counteract that previous process to make sure that you're getting to where you need to be for the current situation. Instead of eliminating a non-value added process, we've added a secondary non-value added process. So it's important to go through that and understand why you're doing the things in the current state and what that means to the future state to streamline your organization's operations. Typically, these are done in workshops, and workshops tend to be 3 to 4 to possibly 5 hour increments. Unless you've gone through these, I don't think you realize, if you have gone through these, you do realize. If you haven't, you may not realize how exhausting these sessions can be, because you're asking people to think out of the box. You're asking them to think about things that and look at things from a different angle than they've previously looked at them, and step out of their comfort zone. So these can be pretty exhausting. And the workshop agendas are customized for the functional business areas. So you do have different agendas for each one, but it's important that you maintain that cross-functional team. And by the way, this is a perfect time of the year to do that. It's a time when people take measure both in their personal lives, in their fitness and their health, but also take measure in terms of their organization, whether it be at home or personally, how you interact and how you run your day or your week or your month. And it's time to look at that from a business perspective too, because too often I think that gets put in the back burner. We're so busy doing that we don't work on the business, we work in the business. And so this is an important time of year to take a look at this and say, how can I work on my business today? How can I work on my field today? How can I help the company transform and be a better company? So one of the main goals when you come out of this, or one of the main objectives, and it should be something that happens as part of the nature of the methodology that we use, and that's aligning the people, the processes, and the technology. So what are the people? The people are doing stuff. They are the ones who interact every day. They deal with your customers. They deal with the operations. They deal with your suppliers. They deal with your vendors, and they deal with internal people in internal departments as they go through this. And then we've got technology. We've got all kinds of technology out there. It's amazing, isn't it? Everything from the technology on your phone to the technology on your laptop or computer, and the technology that exists on mobile devices in general, whether it be an iPad or a tablet of some sort. These are growing in the workplace and being used everywhere, and it gives the innovation. It enables people, it gives people the ability to do their jobs more efficiently and better if used properly, if applied properly. And then there's the process, which is how stuff gets done. So that process, if that process does not align with the technology and that doesn't align with what people are doing, you end up with having to do something. It becomes like buying, and I'm not picking on anybody who might be in the insurance field, but it becomes like buying insurance. It's that necessary evil, that thing we have to do. I have to hit F5 before I go to this step. And I have to do that because the system says I have to do that, even though that's not what I want to do, and it interferes with what I'm doing. Or I have to do this particular process. We call it the Fred and Mabel syndrome. And that's, you know, in the old days, that was when Fred received a memo in his inbox, and he took that memo in his inbox and he read it, and then he put it into Mabel's inbox, and then Mabel picked that memo up, she read it and put it back in Fred's inbox. That's a process that doesn't add value to anything. And the modern day equivalent to that is all about emails. And I love email. It's a great tool, but I hate email when it's used to just cover all aspects when you go through that process. So in essence, you're just doing it on a multiple layer level of doing it. So that's the process piece of this. So process, technology, and people, and getting it all together. When you align all these, what you get is the win. And that's where the circles here intersect. And that win means that what my people are doing, the technology that they're using, and the process that they're going through align to add the most value to my customer. And in doing that, in aligning the people and the processes, and then bringing in the technology to enable them and to support them, becomes a win situation. Organizational change management. In here we say that business process reengineering and change management go hand in hand. Oftentimes, your business process reengineering is your initial foray into change management. Change management is really critical as you go through this. And again, this is a great time for change because it is the beginning of the year, and it's a way to look at things in a new and different aspect. The change that exists and what has to happen has to do with the adoption rate. And the adoption rate is the rate at which employees and teammates adopt new processes, new systems, new ways of doing business. And in order to do that, they have to understand why. Why is all this happening? I've got a colleague of mine, Mike Walker, who is an extraordinarily smart person. And he often says it's his favorite radio station. He uses the initial "what's in it for me." And they have to know what that means to them. And it's a very apropos statement that he makes. Because if they don't understand what's happening, if it happens to them at the end of the day, you say, hey, here's your new process, here's what you're doing, and they didn't know this was coming at them, now they're gonna dig in their heels a bit. Why are you doing this to me? Why do I have to do this? What does it mean? So it's not just about training people to do things a certain way, it's about training them on why they need to do it a certain way and what that means to other departments as well as their department and how that works. we often tell a story about change, and people can resist change because change is hard. Getting people to step out of their comfort zone is a difficult thing. And one of the stories we tell about change is that they, when I started working in the, living in the suburbs and working in the city, I would come across people who would stand at the train station in the same exact spot on the train platform, get into the same exact car on the train, sit in the same seat on the train, carrying the same brown bag with the same cheese sandwich that they've had in there for the last 30 years. They do that routine every single day the same exact way. And if anything doesn't happen in that order, that's a really bad day to them. So change is hard, and it's important to make sure that we understand what that means. With BPR, change is going to happen. It's going to, you need to take control over the process, and you need to be the one that's initiating that type of change. And there's a quote that I that I use. A friend of mine is big into the NASCAR and Formula One racing, and he has said more than once to me that you have to create your own conditions. And he's a big rain guy. he likes to drive in the rain. He says you have to create your own conditions, and then rain is just rain. And so creating your own conditions, creating your own process, your own changes that have to happen within the organization, getting buy-in through the entire organization. Ongoing improvement is key. Just because your BPR sessions and or completing a successful ERP go live, that's just the beginning. We have a a blog out there, again, written by Mike Walker, which is, I just did my future state BPR sessions now with. And he really goes into some depth of explaining what are the next steps, what do I need to do? And one of the things that he points out in there is that you streamlined your processes, but that's an ongoing journey. It's not an event. This is something that is more of a process of continuing to improve. A lot of times the core team that worked through the business process improvement in the BPR process becomes your continuous improvement panel, or your continuous improvement group. And they look at things every day and say, how can we improve this? Or if we're adding a new process, what does this do to the other processes? The impact analysis that exists like that. And so it's an ongoing journey. And like any machinery, like your cars, like anything that you use on a daily basis, it requires some maintenance. It has to be oiled. It has to have the oil changed. It has to do certain things to make sure the longevity of it stays with it. So the documents that you create in the BPR sessions, those future state documents, become living documents, and they need to be maintained and nurtured and walked through and looked at and reviewed from time to time. So we want to give you some real life examples and then leave some time for questions after that. So we'll go through these pretty quick. We've got a full service importer. They are a distributor and marketing of brands from Mexico and South America into the United States. They're located in Texas for logical geographical reasons. They undertook upgrading their system. When they looked at upgrading their system, they decided that it was really a re-implementation. And they decided to take that re-implementation to the next level by doing business process re-engineering and looking at the processes that they had done when they were a very small company. They have grown significantly, I think 4 times more than they had started with, or more. And because of that exponential growth that they've had processes that have just kind of fit in, that filled in, that just kind of happened to them. And they decided that in order to create their own conditions, so to speak, they had to go ahead and go through the BPR process. We have just completed going through the future state with them. We're presenting our final findings to them. And we work very closely with the value-added reseller in this case. They're going with a AX version of D365. And by working very closely with the reseller on this and the implementer of the system, they participated in all the sessions. They know what that design has to be in order to achieve the goals and objectives and the processes that they want to achieve. So I've also got a firm that does something that is fascinating to me. They're a biotechnology company. They are a huge dedication to quality. They are an FDA regulated organization, and they basically make reagents. And reagents is a part of a pharmaceutical. It doesn't touch the end patient, so to speak, but it is in testing and in every product that goes through the FDA. So they're heavily regulated by that. And they basically use the blood of a blue horseshoe crab, or part of it, as a making of that reagent and coagulation capabilities that it has. And going through what they have to do from a standard standpoint, on a business process standpoint, is they have to achieve the good manufacturing process, or the current good manufacturing process status with the FDA. And it's a defined set of rules that they have to go through to make sure that all their processes and controls are in place. Think of it a little bit like Sarbanes-Oxley for the production and handling of materials. And so in going through this process, they were upgrading their system. And part of the upgrade of the system, they had to make sure that these controls were in place and that the processes were well thought out and well documented. And we help them go through that and performing a gap analysis currently with them to say, what is the gap between the new system and the controls that exist in the new system and the processes that they will need to put in place to make sure that they maintain that compliance. So we've got an hydraulic controls manufacturer. They do off-highway and they also do automotive. A lot of the off-highway work that they did in the business process reengineering that we did for that was, what are the same? So they have two different divisions that exist out there. One's automotive, one's off-highway. Where do the processes meet and where are they consistent with each other? Instead of having two different processes that exist, can it be one process? And so that was the first economy of scale that we approached. And where it couldn't, which happened quite often, what did those processes look like and how should those be handled? One of their divisions is a very repetitive manufacturing division. The other is a very job shop, engineer to order type of division. And so it was easy to combine the two in finance, for instance, but it was much more difficult to combine the two when it came to manufacturing. So what were those processes? Why were they different? And how did they interact with the overall organization? Were one of the things that we were tasked with in going through the business process reengineering piece. So in doing so, they were able to align what they were bringing in for their new system with the new processes and have that system not customized, but configured to work with them in the processes that they wanted to use in both areas so they could seamlessly go from a common process to a diverse process back to a common process. So with that, we will open it up for questions. Brad?
Yeah, John, thank you for that presentation. So we did have a few questions come in. If you were holding them for the end, now's your time to just submit those through the Q&A or chat portal, and we'll definitely address them. So John, the first one I have here is, realistically, how much does a client put into a BPR project? Does your team do a majority of the heavy lifting? You mentioned 3 to 5 hour sessions. How many sessions typically do you have, or typically do we execute, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Typically, we try to hit the major functional areas, and that determines the number of sessions. Somewhere between 6 to 8 current state sessions, and usually pretty similar 6 to 8 additional sessions on top of that for the future state. The project team from the client, from a resource commitment, tends to be anywhere from, I would say, 5 to maybe 12 people, although we've had extremes where they've had up to 40 people in a session. Those 5 to 10 people or 8 people tend to be more along the lines of core team members that attend every session. And then in addition to that, the subject matter experts come in. Usually done over a period of time of anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 weeks, depending on the magnitude. We've had a client that started out very small with this and grew into 40 sessions that they wanted to do because they thought that there were other areas that could benefit from going through this process. So a little bit depends on the client, a little bit depends on the environment, a little bit depends on the market, but in general, those are the average numbers.
Great. Next one that just came in. How would you convince a company who wants to do an ERP implementation that BPR is vital to the company success of their implementation?
So there's a couple different, there's one thing I forgot to address, Brad, on the last question, the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting is really done by the core project team. What we do is help facilitate and draw that out of them and bring in best practices from what we've seen, not just in their industry, but in industries throughout the country and throughout the world that we've seen and work with. This second question, how do you convince a company that it's time to do that? you're making a large investment in a new ERP system. And at the end of the day, do you really want that new ERP system to automate processes that may not have been the most efficient processes to begin with? In other words, at the end of the day, after you've spent all this money to implement the new ERP system, is anybody going to be jumping up and ground saying, hey, this is great, we have this new technology, it's wonderful, but we're still doing things the same way that we always did them, we just do them faster. And sometimes automating a bad process is a really, has a very negative impact on the organization, because now I'm doing a bad thing, I'm just doing a bad thing faster. So if I can look at my processes and align my processes with the technology, with the people, I'm gonna have a much more whole solution. And for an incremental amount of investment that I'm making in that, I'm gonna get an extreme value out of the fact that I now have the system running, using the system to run the business instead of the system running the business. Systems and ERP systems are made for the masses, so they're not made for individual businesses necessarily. And along those lines, you need to figure out what your business is and how you want to run it, and then how is the system going to support that.
Great. Next one I have here is, looks like it's addressing the ongoing improvement slide. How often do you suggest that processes are reevaluated, and what sort of team should be reevaluating that? Is it the original team? Is it a smaller internal team, etc.?
Great question. That happens along a couple of different lines. So there's two different ways that the processes get looked at. One is event-driven, and one is a schedule-driven. Typically, every 12 to 18 months, the processes are reviewed. In most cases, it is the core team from the original team that has done that, along with any additional subject matter experts that may take a look at this. That tends to be on a scheduled basis that you want to take a look at that. The event basis can happen along several different ways, either a new line of business, an acquisition, other things that happen that impact the business, and taking a look at the processes that you're doing right now and how those fit in or mesh in, or how those puzzle pieces fit together with that new business, that new opportunity, the new process that's being introduced, a new line of business that you may be launching. And that tends to start out as a smaller team, and it may grow into a larger team, but it may be very focused on what does this core piece mean, and then bringing in members from the core team to say, hey, let's look at this as a whole, and doing the same types of activities, not necessarily with our input, but doing the same type of activities as you would have done, or as you have done in the original. One of the things that we leave behind when we go through a business process reengineering engagement is our methodology, how we do this, how it's performed, so that on a smaller scale, you can do that internally. On a larger scale, when you're doing this, you really want to use an outside facilitator so that you get an objective view of what's going on. And you don't just get a view of people who've been working in the company for the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 years, because their view might be a little slanted towards what they know and what they've been doing.
Perfect. Looks like we've got 2 minutes left, so we'll go ahead and we'll ask one more question here. What's the most common mistake or issue holding back clients that you typically see?
Holding back clients is either a lack of understanding of what the process does and what going through and looking at your process means. A lack of success happens from not having a core team that is cross-functional. Many clients have a problem understanding at the outset why I need accounting to sit in with the manufacturing team to go over the manufacturing processes. Once they go through it, they get it. And that becomes one of the biggest comments that we get at the end of this, is getting that whole team together and working together and understanding what is happening from end to end. No one's ever done that before. We've never done that before. We hear that comment very frequently. And it's eye-opening, it's enlightening. I never knew we did things this way. Those are some of the comments we hear from it. So if you try to do this in an individual basis on a single work stream or value stream that you're putting together, it becomes very piecemeal. When you put together the whole thing in a consistent cross-functional manner, it becomes very meaningful. That's where most companies fail when they try to do this, and it's one of the reasons why they want to bring in an outside facilitator to help ask the questions that will lead to other departments or participating in that particular subject area.
Great. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. If you do have any more questions or comments, feel free to reach out to John or myself. Our contact information is here on the screen. We appreciate you taking the time this morning to join us, and we'll be sending out a recording of this webcast as well as just a schedule for upcoming webcasts. If not today, then hopefully tomorrow. And again, we appreciate your time this morning, and thank you, John, for your presentation.
Thanks, everybody. We truly appreciate your time this morning, and please reach out to us if you have any questions or comments or just want to have a chat about stuff. Thank you.